the origin point of the Slavs here in East Europe, at this incredibly dynamic ethnic crossroads, really, this huge swathe of steppe, an open road that wave upon wave of Asian nomadic peoples such as the Bulgars, the Huns, the Pechenegs sweep up through, and the invasion of the Tartars. Then from the north to the south you have the Neva River, the Volkhov, and then across the upper Dvina, and then the Dnieper River, which forms this water route that links the trading and raiding civilization of the Vikings, the Varangas, with Constantinople in the south, which is the fortress that forms the centre and capital of the Eastern Roman Empire, which survived for about 1,000 years after the fall of the Western Roman Empire, and which was the centre of the Orthodox religion. This dynamic trade route from this cosmopolitan gateway between Europe and Asia and Constantinople and the Viking civilization falls right through the territory that's being inhabited by the Slavic peoples. And along this waterway you have Novgorod in the north, Smolensk and Kiev, Slavic settlements developing with other smaller settlements. It was in this context that Rurik, the Viking prince, became Prince of Novgorod and started the dynasty that would become the first dynasty of the future Tsars. The origin of the word Rus, one of the hypotheses is that it comes from Rothman, the seafarers, through the Finnish word Ruotsi, which was what they called the Varanga Viking raiders that passed through their territory. Or another hypothesis that has been suggested by Vernadsky is that it comes from Ruchs, from the Alani nomads in the 8th century, for whom Ruchs would mean bright and would refer to the blonde hair of the Rus civilization. As early as 838, the Annals of St. Bertin record a group of Norsemen defining themselves as Ross in Constantinople. So it's very clear that the origin of the word Ruski traces to this Eastern Viking principality, which then had been imposed upon the larger Slavic population. So then if you look at the dynasty of Rurik, succeeded briefly by his kinsman Oleg and then by his son Ingvar, or Igor to use his Slavic name, and Olga Helga, by the 3rd generation, their son, Sviatoslav, the grandson of Rurik, already has a Slavic name, which combines the Slavic words for holy and for glorious. And according to some etymologies, the Old Norse word for glorious is Rurik, and the Old Norse word for holy is Oleg, so it may be a translation of his ancestors into the Slavic language. And then by his son Vladimir, we already have evidence that he was worshipping the Slavic gods, particularly the thunder god Perun, and so clearly you can watch the Viking origins of the dynasty becoming more and more Slavic as they absorb the influences of the Slavic civilization under them. Olga, who had a reign that was very famous for its wisdom and so forth, had converted to Orthodox Christianity, but it was really Vladimir's conversion in 988 that was followed by the state conversion of all the people of Kiev and Rus, and the baptism of the people of Kiev, which forms a founding moment for the Russian and Ukrainian Orthodox churches. So it was at that point that the Byzantine society had a huge influence through the priests of the Orthodox Church, through the monasteries that were established, and through the language of the Slavic Bible, Old Church Slavonic, in which the earliest chronicles of the Rus civilization were written. And there you can see a comparison of the Byzantine icons and the Russian icons. As the Orthodox religion spread upwards from Byzantine Greece, the first Slavic Bible was based on the Slavic dialects spoken in modern-day Thessaloniki in the north of Greece, by its translators, the saints Cyril and Methodius. This language, which has been variously called Old Macedonian or Old Bulgarian, was standardized in the Cyrillic alphabet, named after St. Cyril, based loosely on the Greek. Because this Cyrillic alphabet, which was created in the First Bulgarian Empire's capital of Preslav, was the language of the Bible, and thus renamed Old Church Slavonic, it became a lingua franca in East Europe. So you can see, for example, the effects of that if you compare the Russian language with the modern Bulgarian language. Just to take the features of the face, for example, in normal Russian language, the forehead is called lob, but in the poetic, high literary style, as in noble brow, it could be referred to as chelo, and then the Bulgarian for forehead, chelo. Glaza is the normal Russian for eyes, but, for example, in the poetic use in the song Ochi Chornia, they're referred to as ochi, and that's the same as the Bulgarian. Again, gubi, rot, lips, mouth, but poetically referred to as usta, again very similar to the Bulgarian. So this influence from the southern Slavic empires became quite clear. Now, a huge break in the culture happened in 1237, when you have the invasion of Batu Khan, grandson of Genghis Khan, which swept through those open steppes that we were looking at, put entire cities to the sword, burned them to the ground when they refused to submit to the overlordship of the Khans. Only Smolensk survived by submitting, and Novgorod because the Mongol invasion didn't make it that far. So after this point, for 250 years, Russia became a vassal state paying tribute to the Khans, largely cut off from the main developments of Europe. The originally small town of Moscow developed as the centre of tribute collection for the Golden Horde and the centre of the Grand Prince, who had to be approved by the Tartar overlords. It also had, of course, huge psychological impact, this traumatic event. You can see this impact in the Bogatyr legends, which are folk hero eposes, many of them referring to popular knights who lived during the glory days of the pre-Mongol Rus, and which were spread and sung among the peasants. On the left there you see Ilya Muromets, Ilya of Murom, who was one of the most famous of them, and often in opposition to Batu Khan, Bati in Russian, or Bati Batchevich. There's once in particular where Ilya is captured and about to be executed when he prays to the Orthodox god, doubles in strength and grabs a Tartar and beats the entire Tartar horde with the Tartar that he's swinging around over his head. This idea that Russia was the saviour of Europe, that it single-handedly protected European civilization from the Asian nomads. This is made more complex, for example, by the existence of a Turkic Bogatyr folk hero, Sukmanti Odikmantovich, and that is him on the right there, who is thought to be based on an actual 12th century prince, Kontu Dve, of the Turkic Turk people who defended Rus and drove the Polovtsi raiders from the Dnieper before falling into disfavour by slander and switching sides. In the Belina, these events are reflected by Sukmanti, who does not boast or drink with the other feasters at Kiev, but then single-handedly defeats a force of 40,000 Tartars, and only armed with this gigantic branch that he has broken from a tree with which he clubs all of them, and you can see various crushed Tartars under his feet there. But when Prince Vladimir of Kiev refuses to believe him and casts him into the dungeon, he turns his back on Kiev and rides far out into the steppe, where the Sukman River flows from the sorrowful wounds he gained in defending Rus. This is why he looks quite depressed in that picture. This tale serves as a reproach and reminder to the Russian people in the folk tradition that immortalizes the non-Russians who risk their lives in defense of the state and warns against ingratitude in some ways. The next stage in the development of Russia, in 1453, Constantinople, the centre of the Orthodox religion, fell to the Turks. The last emperor, Constantine Palaeologus' niece Sophia, married Ivan III, the Grand Prince of Moscow, in 1472, and Moscow became the new centre of the Orthodox faith. In continuity with the Byzantine tradition, it was Ivan who first began to call himself Tsar, or Caesar, to foreign emissaries, throwing off the Tartar yoke and establishing for Moscow the mythology of the Third Rome, Moscow being built on 7 hills like the First Rome, and continuing the traditions of Constantinople. So the traditions of Russian autocracy and its justification was partly imported from the imperial Byzantine model of the Eastern Roman Empire, along with the influence of Tartar authoritarian rule. And what's interesting about this is if you look at Novgorod, which is the only area of Russia that actually remained independent of Tartar rule throughout the 250 years, democracy survived in the Vecha, an ancient Slavic tradition of rule by council, where theoretically any free man could ring the town bell and call an assembly. By the 15th century, democracy in the Novgorod Republic had evolved into an elaborate dual system, dividing authority between the Vecha and the Council of Lords. It was Tsar Ivan the Great, after assuming this title of the emperor and the guardian of the heritage of the Second Rome, which had just fallen, who obtained this absolute submission of the Novgorod Vecha to his imperial rule, dismantling and seizing the city's bell as a symbol of this. Bearing in mind the huge influence of Constantinople's empire on the shape of Ivan's rule, the shaping of Moscow as a seat of the Grand Prince under Tartar rule, was the shape and tradition of Russian autocracy itself a borrowing from Byzantine and Tartar cultures?